My name is Jason Miller. I'm a flight instructor. This is Jeff Simon. Jeff is an A&P mechanic. He's also the founder of SocialFlight and Approach Aviation.
Yes, and a pilot, of course, as well. And I want to be really clear, by execute the Schiff Show, we are not killing it by taking over for Brian.
We're trying to do Brian a favor. He unfortunately could not make the show this afternoon, so we're calling it a shiftless show, even though he asked us to call it the No Schiff Show. So, you know, we had to keep it PG. Today we're going to talk a little bit, we're going to try a little bit to stick to Brian's format, whereas an accident review, there's procedures, there's training, technology, and at the end we'll do some fun games. So I thought we would dive in a little bit by introducing an accident that I think I've learned a lot from. How many of you have seen the Air Safety Institute videos? All right, have folks seen one called Final Approach? There is a video called Final Approach. If you haven't seen it, all of those videos are amazingly educational. There's a lot to learn from those videos. And we're going to talk a little bit today, initially, about that flight. And Jeff, you said you hadn't seen that either. Is that correct?
You know, it might have been a while ago. I may have actually seen something having to do with it, but you're going to educate me now.
Yeah, well, so for years I taught flight instructor renewal courses for AOPA and taught rusty pilot courses, and we would always dig into the Air Safety Institute videos, and there's not one of those videos that I don't walk away from having learned a lot. All right, well, in this particular case, we have a pilot who's flying from the southeast of the United States up to Maryland. He plans a 3-hour, 45-minute cross-country flight, but he leaves at a time of day where he ends up arriving in the dark. As he approaches the destination, about 3 hours and 20 minutes into the flight, 15 miles away from the destination airport, the pilot ahead of him had to go missed. All right, so before he starts the approach, air traffic control says to him, the pilot in front of you had to execute a missed approach, say your intentions. And he kind of says, well, if that guy had to go missed, then I'm going to go to my alternate. And that started a chain reaction that ultimately caused him to run out of fuel in the dark and crash the airplane.
And yet that first decision seems like the best one you could make, because we've seen so many accidents that have to do with trying to get into an airport. And so at least the first attempt seems like it makes sense.
True. Although I might have tried it once. You know, I mean, like, I'm not sure. I don't know the pilot in front of me. I don't know how proficient that pilot is. I don't know what kind of equipment that pilot has. So, in any case, we can, you know, we'll give you the overview and we'll come back and sort of break it into pieces. But he proceeds to the alternate airport and begins to fly a series of approaches. Now, there was widespread low overcast. The whole eastern seaboard was covered, and there was really nowhere for him to go other than getting into the alternate or returning home. And after 1, 2, 3 approach attempts, he's executing these LPV approaches. He's almost making it to minimums. He's getting down to about 200 feet above minimums, and then he's going missed. He starts to say that there's a problem with the GPS, okay, that he suspects he's having a problem with the GPS, and he wants to try it again, and again, and again. And eventually, he flies over a military airbase, and he's feeling nervous at this point, hours into the flight, 4 hours and 20 minutes into the flight. He asks the military controller, is there any way he can land at the military field? To which she responds, only in an emergency. Minutes later, he ran out of fuel in the dark, and, you know, forced landing, off airport, fatal accident. And that's what we have.
Wow.
Yeah. So there's a lot to learn from this. It makes me think of a flight that I did. You know, I'm from the San Francisco Bay Area, usually teaching flying in the Bay Area, and one night I got caught out on a really stormy night. And coming in, I was with a student, and it's hard to see the weather coming in out of the south near Half Moon Bay and off the Pacific coast. And when we turned around to head home, I realized we were in over our heads a little bit. And I heard on the frequency a Southwest jet holding, and the Southwest jet made a comment saying, "I've got one more turn in this hold, and then I have to go to my alternate." And it stuck out to my ears because this airline pilot, the Southwest pilot, had a line in the sand. I mean, there was no guessing. It was exactly, at some moment, I am going to have to do something different. And that's the kind of diligence we should have. That's the kind of attention to flight planning we should have. Instead, this pilot just kept banging his head on the wall until he ran out of fuel.
Wow. Yeah, you know, the other thing that comes to mind as you talk about that is the concept of emergencies and the fear, I think, that is sort of drilled into students and that we develop as pilots of what are the consequences of declaring an emergency? What does that really mean? Where is that on your list of resources to go to when you need to? And I think in many cases, that idea of doing something as an emergency, it needs to come down. It needs to be much lower on your list of things that concern you, of when would I do this? When would I declare an emergency in order to make something happen?
Yeah, 100%. It's absolutely worth thinking through. And of all the pilots that I know that have had to declare emergencies over the years, not one of them has had to fill out the paperwork that we're so afraid of, right? You hear that if you can declare an emergency, but you might have to fill out a report for the FAA.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I have a story of that as well. I was coming in many, many years ago when I was just a pup. This grade didn't exist, and coming in before we had XM weather on board or certainly ADS-B weather on board, and there was a lot of weather in front of me between where I was going and my destination, which happened to be Minuteman in Stowe, Massachusetts. And there's an airport beyond that that's Hanscom, that's more bigger field and right past there. And at the time I was looking at some really nasty weather in front of me, and approach control was telling me, well, if you could just get around it, it's fine behind it, right? And they can only see precipitation, and they can only see precipitation 15 minutes ago and what it actually was, given the rate and the things that actually go in there. And I remember making that decision with my family on board at the time, heading south, working my way around it, and by the time we got around what they said was just something in between me and my destination, all of 15 minutes away, that entire Boston area went convective. And they wanted to vector me way out in order to land. And I'm seeing lightning around me. I mean, it is the worst case scenario for a general aviation pilot. I'm flying a Grumman Traveler at the time, family on board, and wouldn't call myself by any stretch of the imagination a high-time IFR pilot to be in that scenario. And I, at that time, said to them, when they were putting me, 6 in line to fly way out and God knows what weather to come in on an ILS there, and I said, I need to come in now. And they said, are you declaring an emergency to do that? I said, yes, I need to come in now. And wow. They put me in front. I'll tell you, it didn't affect the Falcon jet that had to wait, or those guys. That's who waited, was the heavy iron. And I'm sure they were fine, maybe a little annoyed, but they were fine. I was really concerned. And there was nothing that followed that. They gave me priority, they brought me in, they got me on the ground, and the worst thing that happened to me out of that entire experience was the people at the FBO that went to my family and said, "Oh my God, are you okay? I can't believe he did that to you."
Ego damage.
Exactly.
Has anybody
and the
here
flight that came in and said we wouldn't have flown in that?
Right. Has anybody here ever declared an emergency in flight? And of you folks, how many of you had to fill out FAA paperwork and go through a whole debacle? Nobody, right?
Nobody.
That's always what I hear. So keeping that in mind. The other thing that you can do, this is a little bit embarrassing, but I do a lot of instrument instruction. The Bay Area Marine Layer is some of the best IFR training in the world. And I got caught out once with a student with very little fuel. Again, like I said, it was embarrassing. I had to use minimum fuel. Are you guys aware that there's a minimum fuel declaration where it's one level below an emergency, right? It's not technically an emergency that you're declaring, but if you use the phrase minimum fuel, they'll give you priority handling. I felt really bad because there was a whole string of airliners coming into Oakland, which was where we were filed to. And when I realized what our situation was, that we really needed to get the airplane on the ground and still have reserves, I told ATC, look, we've got minimum fuel, and I definitely used that exact language. And at that point, they just sent the airliners in big box patterns, probably 4 or 5 of them, while I came in on the approach. So it was a tail between my legs kind of moment. but that option does exist, minimum fuel.
I think that whole concept of pilot in command and using that priority that you have and those rights that you have as a pilot is one of the things I learned much later in my flying career than I wish I had. And I pretty much learned every one of those lessons the hard way. I think I had a fantastic instructor in many ways, but in some ways when it came to flying in the real system, I didn't really get that. I had an instance where I was flying back from Canada once and ended up deviating because of weather, and everything started to line up in that accident chain in front of me in a really bad way. And I was so worried about the fact that I had been told that for customs, you have to go to your declared airport, you have to be there at the right time. This is bad. If you just divert to another airport, even one with customs, they're gonna think you're running drugs or doing something. That was so strong in my mind that with all this, I watched my fuel tick down, and I've read all the things about running out of fuel, and I've heard all the phrases, and I know what Brian Schiff says about running out of fuel.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I was so scared of what would happen there that I flew right over Burlington Airport, didn't land there, didn't give it a second thought because I thought I'd get in trouble. Went all the way there. By the time that I was on final approach, I was looking at those needles that were barely reading anything, if anything, in the tank, and managed to land, and again at Hanscom in this case, managed to land at that airport. And I remember the lineman afterwards coming over to me and just saying, how much fuel does this plane take? And I said, 37 gallons. He said, I put 37 gallons in this plane.
Wow, yeah.
I regret that to this day. It's amazing that I managed to live through that.
Yeah.
But it was the fear of doing something else that put me in that position. And I think we have to start thinking a lot harder about putting our own lives in front of any consequences.
Yeah, 100%. Another thing that jumps out to me about this, well, there are two things from an instrument instructor's perspective. Instrument flying is very difficult. Single pilot IFR, especially single pilot IFR at night, is very, very challenging, especially when things aren't going your way. The psychological aspect of doing one approach and then two approaches and three approaches and you're not getting in. But yet when I'm, in the right seat teaching, this guy got to 200 feet above minimums and then he went missed. It's that last 200 feet, that your student starts to lose it and they're like, oh, okay, close enough. I'm getting out of here. We're not actually going all the way to minimums. So I think it's a reminder for us in training to develop the confidence that we need to actually execute a flight like this. This was a pretty bold undertaking. And back to that initial decision of him not going into the original destination, I completely agree with you. If the weather was below minimums, don't go try it. But in this case, the weather was above minimums.
Oh, okay.
It was reported above minimums. It was the first sign we had that his skill he wasn't as confident as he needed to be. Like I said, if it were me and the weather was above minimums and the airplane in front of me had to go missed, if it's still above minimums, I'm going to try it. I don't know if that guy hasn't flown IFR in,
right.
5 months and 28 days. Who knows,
yeah,
right?
Good point.
And it was hard to see this where he's almost there. Had he just held on to that approach on that alternate, just another 200 feet, he would have gone visual.
Wow.
So in training, we really have to remember not to try to make it easy. Not to try to convince yourself that you're there if you're not fully there. Yeah.
Absolutely. I want to ask you about another word that goes with what we've been talking about earlier, and that's the kind of my new favorite word to ATC, and that's unable.
Yeah.
And I'd like to ask you a little bit about how and when, or sort of when in the order that you use this, because I've had this coming out here to Oshkosh, flying out this way where they're congested, they really want to keep you in their sector, they want you to do certain things, and a lot of times air traffic control will send you into or put you on a course that would go right into weather you absolutely would never put yourself into. And the first is executing that idea of unable and not putting yourself in there, and then the second is, do you turn first? Do you actually keep yourself, you see something doesn't look right, you're having trouble raising them on a frequency, or just because other people are talking? you turn first and then refuse or tell them what you do? Because usually here, I need 20 degrees left of course for weather, or I need something like that. But sometimes it feels like you want to just take an action.
Yeah. But you know, that's not an easy question to answer, because sometimes, you know, like from where I'm sitting, everybody from student pilot level all the way up to expert flyers that have been flying for decades, you know, some students might say, oh, you know, like I'm unable, I got to turn and actually create more problems than there were to begin with, you know. So it's a difficult question to answer black and white, but at the end of the day, you're pilot in command of the aircraft and you are responsible for the safe operation of the flight. And if you think like air traffic control is too busy and you could justify your decision to turn or maneuver or get out of the way even without their permission, and you feel like you could defend it, then you do it if that's what's going to be the safest, you know, way to fly.
Well, to me, it goes to what you've said about standard procedures and what you follow,
yeah,
right? And what you believe that airlines do, of knowing if it gets to this point, you make a different decision, right?
Yeah.
So you have your personal minimums. Those personal minimums can be the distance you are willing to get to a thunderstorm, or the distance you are willing to get to magenta on your, you know, on your scope, or whatever you're using for weather.
Yeah.
And you shouldn't violate that, in my opinion at least, or I'd like your thoughts on it. You shouldn't violate that just because there happen to be talking to a Gulfstream and someone else, and you haven't gotten a chance to give them to talk to them and say, I need 20 degrees left.
Yeah.
Which they're probably going to give you.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, it comes down to the safe operation of the aircraft. If you're going to penetrate a thunderstorm, I mean, there was a classic, when I was coming up, one of my CFIs took a camera out to Washington, D.C. It was Reagan or Dulles. I can't remember what airport he was listening to, but he's got the radio tuned in, and he's filming a thunderstorm arriving, and there's airliners inbound to the airport. And air traffic control was saying, you know, Delta 232, I need you to turn left heading 140. And you hear the Delta captain say, unable, like we're painting, like red returns there. And he got frustrated, moved on to the other one. Okay, fine, American 232, I need you to go right heading 060. American said the same thing, like unable, sir, like we're painting red. And this was going on for a minute until the controller finally said, listen, like I need you guys to turn on the headings that I'm saying, until finally one of the aircraft declared the emergency. Delta or whoever it was just finally keyed the mic and said, you know what, sir, we'll just declare the emergency. And there was a sense of relief for the controller, because upon hearing those words, you're declaring an emergency, the controller is then free to become your backup team, right? Free to just say, okay, fine, you guys fly whatever heading you need to, and I'll try to keep you out of your way, or I'll do whatever I can to help you keep this a safe operation.
Yep.
It was a profound learning moment for me.
Yep, yeah, and I'll let the person that actually did this speak for themselves, but I know that there was a story told to me very recently by someone we all know, who was flying and being told that they had that they couldn't make a turn that they needed to make. Again, because air traffic control sees things different than we do. They see the coordination they have to make between sectors. They see a bunch of things that traffic and clearance and spatial issues that we don't necessarily see. And he was saying, I need south, I need south, I need south now, and they weren't doing it. And came back and said, I'm turning south. You want me to remain on this, or you want me on 7700 on the transponder?
Yeah.
And there was a pregnant pause, and approach control came back and said, remain on your squawk code.
Fly heading 180. Well, you mentioned procedures briefly, and I know we were just talking about this accident, the final approach accident, and at the end we'll have time if anyone has questions or comments or things they want to add to it.
Do we want to talk about the serious one too?
Yeah, that's what I was going to kind of lead into, if that's all right.
Go for it. Yeah,
I mean, Jeff, you taught me something last week that blew my mind. I've been flying for 23 years. I've got over 10,000 hours of experience, and I've never heard this before, and I think it's important to get the word out. And it's not just me. I think a lot of pilots. There was an accident recently, and we're not going to speculate on what the actual cause of the accident was, because I don't think that's appropriate yet. There's no data at all. But regardless of what the cause of the accident was, it brought your point to light. Even if that wasn't what it is, your point is valid, and I think it's worth talking about. The accident, briefly, was a Cirrus flying, I think, from Florida up to Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, something like that. and the guy reported electrical problems, saying he's having trouble
Well,
with his...
he reported radio. It was interesting. So this was a flight, and we're only, like as Jason said, we're only going to talk about kind of what is known now and what we sort of get a little spidey sense we can learn from regardless of what they ultimately find out. But this was a flight, full flight, he had his family on board, that was going up the Florida coast, and very, very early in this flight, he started saying he was having radio problems that were getting worse. And that's the first thing. So, show of hands, how many people here have an idea what goes off in your head when you start having radio problems? What? Voltage. It's easy to start thinking about the symptom, right, which is the radio. But the radios take a lot of power. That's where you're getting a lot of power come out. That's why you pay extra for certain wattage on radios. And so you need to start thinking, if you're having a radio problem of any kind, am I having an electrical system problem, first of all? We don't know what he was thinking. We know that he only said on the frequency, I'm having a radio problem. And what he chose to do was continue the flight and solve the radio problem by asking them to relay ahead what his intentions were going to be for the remainder of the flight, and so that the field could be prepared if he were not going to have radios at that time. So
right.
Go ahead.
Well, yeah, and we're taught, I teach this, that the electrical system in an aircraft is not, let's say it this way, the engine of the aircraft is not reliant on the electrical system. Right? It's one of the very early lessons we get. When you drive your car and you lose your alternator, ultimately your car is going to die. But in most airplanes, especially belt-driven trainers like the Cessna 172 that I train in, or Piper aircraft, if the belt breaks and the alternator stops functioning, the engine will be perfectly fine. That's why we have magnetos. In fact, we've got 2 magnetos, 2 spark plugs in each cylinder, right? I mean, it's this system of redundancy, and that's the way we present it to people. And I'll let you talk about this a little bit, Jeff, because you're the A&P, but you were the first person to tell me that, wait a minute, in certain engines that are geared alternators, it is possible for the failure of the alternator mechanism to destroy the engine.
Yeah, unfortunately what ended up happening with this Cirrus in factual terms is he didn't make it to his destination. Before it got to the destination, there was some report of some kind that went out about engine trouble. This is about some distance of time into this long flight, and some point short of the airfield, that aircraft went down and I believe everyone perished. And what immediately started, when I saw a lot of things circulating on, YouTube and the internet and all this stuff like that, we always know we get the best data, right? Immediately after an accident from whoever is in their parents' basement speculating on what's happening. No question. That's better than anything that comes out after.
Basement experts, man.
Yeah, exactly. But one of the things that kind of tipped got me a little bit concerned was a number of people that were talking about, these are completely disconnected things, they're completely unrelated, how could all this happen? And it's true, as you mentioned, when I first started flying, I remember saying to everybody on board how safe everything was, because we've got 2 magnetos and we don't need a battery and everything's disconnected here. And then I progressed to flying an aircraft that just happens to have an aircraft with a geared engine, which is Continental IO550s, IO520s, some of the 470s, 360s. There's like a lot. It's not like a small number that have geared alternators. And what that actually means is that the alternator itself is driven directly, not through a belt drive, but directly through something called an alternator coupling, directly to the engine. If you've seen any of these engines that look super slick, it is a good design. It is not a flawed design. It's a good design. And that alternator is just mounted right up there. It all makes sense. It's all slick. Well, there's this component, as I mentioned, the alternator coupling there. And that coupling serves 2 functions, and most people don't understand there's actually 2. The first one, and the really obvious one that it seems, is that since you're attaching this alternator directly to the crankshaft, I mean there's a gear, a ring gear right on that crankshaft, and driving it, well, if something happens to that alternator that were to make it seize in some way, you don't want to trash your engine. And so the first thing that coupling does is it has a mechanism that actually doesn't shear. It's not a permanent type of thing, but there's an elastomeric material that's in there like a donut that can then slip and just start spinning in a cup if it's jammed otherwise. And that system works quite well. The other thing that people don't necessarily realize is that this same coupling, actually, if you're not slipping, the elastomeric that's in there does allow movement in the same way that you can imagine you could twist the inside of a rubber donut a little bit, let it flex back and forth, back and forth. Doesn't mean the outside has to spin. And that takes care of our power pulses when you go to put the gear down and like all the different functions that happen to keep to make it a well-balanced and dampened system. And when it's working well, it works great. However, there's two things that are really big problems that have always been on kind of my mission to solve for people that fly behind these engines. The first thing is proper installation and proper inspection. And Continental has put out service bulletins on this. Superior Parts has put out service bulletins on this. Ram Aircraft has put out, I mean, this is a known thing in the industry. This isn't Jeff has some good idea. Everybody's been yelling from the rooftops, here's the proper way to install this very sensitive, device, so you do it properly. And here's how you regularly inspect it to make sure it's in good condition and operating properly. The challenge is, so many mechanics that I have talked to about these subjects say, what? And then you're like, well, you need a tool to do it. And I don't do that.
And is it implied because of the service bulletin that those companies, when you talk about them, Continental and all the other ones you listed, are aware that if this thing were to fail in a specific way, it could damage the engine?
Absolutely.
And that's why the service bulletin exists.
Yeah, but I want to be clear, it doesn't exist because there's a weakness in design or a problem, because we have service bulletins out for all sorts of stuff. We have service bulletins that say that people aren't breaking in their engines properly. And so you put out a service bulletin that says, hey, this is the right way to break in these cylinders. Anytime that the industry looks out there and says, for some reason, education isn't getting through, we issue a service bulletin. Sometimes we learn about something that's a problem, but if it's a problem, it usually turns into an AD. But in most cases, if it's education-based and it's very preventable if something's done properly, it's a service bulletin.
Mm-hmm. And the service bulletins are not, it's not an airworthiness directive.
Nope.
So if I'm a mechanic, I don't have to comply
Correct.
with the service
Part
bulletin.
91.
Part 91.
If you fly in if the aircraft is operated under Part 91, then the service bulletin is optional. And we have this really difficult kind of yin and yang. On one hand, we all want freedom for Part 91, right? No one's going to make us maintain our aircraft.
Indeed, indeed.
We're gonna run this engine until the engine stops, like whatever. And we want that freedom. But on the other hand, the people don't invest in writing service bulletins for nothing. You should know about it and make an informed decision.
Yeah, and that's the thing. So when you went through those engine models, I just want folks to consider this. The IO 550, that's the engine in all Cirrus SR22s.
All Bonanzas.
All Bonanzas, 206s, right? Mooney Acclaims, right? This is a really ubiquitous engine. It's everywhere. And so the point that you're making, and I think point one for anybody that's flying a machine like that, is when you take that machine in for maintenance, you have to tell the mechanic,
yeah,
I want you to comply with the service bulletin to inspect the alternator coupling.
Yeah, ultimately, we as owners of our aircraft we're the ones responsible for its airworthiness, right? Every student that takes a solo is responsible for the airworthiness of the plane they get in, right?
Yep.
So really, we need to be the ones informed, and we need to be the ones encouraging our mechanics. I know Brian Schiff and I, on our next Cockpit to Cal show, we've got a topic called evaluating your experts. So you can kind of figure out the people in your life you're relying on, and are they good? But yeah, we need to make sure that they're looking into this, or at least get good answers if they're not.
Yeah, that's great. And the second point I think that you made to me anyway is that if you have radio problems, or let's just say electrical problems, you should land as soon as practical. In these aircraft that are equipped with 2 alternators, it's not a great idea to continue to the destination on alternator 2.
Exactly. And that's that second thing. I mentioned the first point is maintenance, the inspection, the installation, make sure that's done right, because if it isn't, it's gonna ruin your day. The second is just what you said, us as operators. If you are operating an aircraft that has a geared alternator on it, then you need to understand that the loss of power from that alternator is an emergency. You land at the nearest airport, period. That's great if you've got a backup battery. That's great if you've got a backup alternator. That's great whatever you decide to load in there to equip your aircraft with, but the whole purpose is still to get you to the nearest landing spot possible, as if you were gliding and you could choose an airport instead of off-field. It's very, very important because you don't know. That's the thing. Lots of things can cause that. If your alternator itself is just failed and it's not affecting the engine, great. If something else happened or the coupling was installed in a way that caused like any number of things, that heavy piece of equipment that's in there spinning in your engine, I have seen it multiple times. I've been on site with engines that thing has turned into a little grenade in that case and has blown up the entire engine and turned something into a very, very big emergency.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that. And I know, honestly, I mean, I know so many people that are flying that engine. Those 2 points are critical. Get your mechanic to comply with the service bulletin for the alternator coupling, and don't continue to the destination on alternator 2. Before we move on to trivia time, and it's hard to believe, but we've got 10 minutes here to go. I just want to make sure if anyone had a comment, or yes, ma'am. What would a low voltage radio issue sound like?
Great question. So the two ways that you're going to hear something like that, or actually I'll give it 3 in this case. The first thing is going to be when you actually push to talk. This is hard during the day, but sometimes you're going to see that when you go to transmit, things dim, because it's going to suck all that power into that. So you'll see some weird things start happening when you press transmit. Could be a glitch, could be something else. You ever see something reboot when you do that? I've seen that happen. It means you've got a real serious power issue, because that's your drain. The second is what you actually hear from people. I mean, static, that's not really the big thing, but hearing and mainly transmitting. Good question.
Does anybody else have a comment about the accident we discussed, or a question you want to ask? Yes, sir.
I'm just going to say it's a plug for Midway Fuel. FAA should never hear you declare an emergency for fuel if you haven't before that said minimum fuel.
Okay, yeah, and minimum fuel was the comment, just reminding everybody that you should not have to declare an emergency for fuel, because prior to that you have the option to say minimum fuel, like I did on that embarrassing flight in Oakland. And you'll get priority handling in, and they'll send all the airliners around, and they'll get you on the ground. So, anybody else? Yes, sir.
If you have an alternator light enunciate, how do you feel about resetting the cycle?
If you have an alternator light enunciate, how do you feel about resetting the overvoltage relay? Is what you're asking, right? Recycling the master switch or resetting a circuit breaker?
Recycling the alternator, the field circuit, which re-engages the alternator. Yeah. So I'll sort of answer that in a qualified way. I think it helps us mechanics on the ground when people can give us some data and some qualified information. And if resetting it re-engages it, that's really good to know. But my rule of thumb, really 2 rules of thumb that have to do with resetting anything, circuit breakers, cycling anything that's in flight. The first is it depends on the circumstance. So if you're VFR, if you're not over some treacherous terrain, you're in an environment that you deem as a pilot that if something bad were to happen when I go and do this, I have an out, then that's my first thing is like, yes, okay. Then my second thing about resetting something in flight like that is once. You get once. Because the whole purpose of this is to gather data. It's never going to solve a problem. And I mean that when I say never going to solve a problem. Because if you have to reset something once, something needs to be fixed. Airplanes do not heal themselves, and if you convince yourselves of something otherwise, then you're just setting yourself up for the first link in the accident chain. So once, if it makes sense, and if you feel it's in a safe environment, and I'll add one last thing, never if it had to do with any smell, like of smoke or burning involved.
Excellent. All right, trivia time.
Trivia time.
As we wrap up the No-Shift Show. The No-Show Schiff.
And we've got some prizes, by the way. I've got some things. We're going to have you just come up afterwards, but if someone's got some good answers to these, then come on up. We'll find something for you.
How many questions do you have? How many trivia questions?
I just have like a series of a few things. I'm not going to take up too much time though.
No,
You
that's
go.
fine.
You wanna
I think you should. Well, all right. I have
You
one.
want me to go?
Yeah, I do.
go? Okay, that's really fine. Let's start going back in time a little bit. I've been spending a lot of time this week actually over at the folks at Hartzell. I work very closely with the guys at Hartzell Engine Technologies, and I like because they've done a lot of work improving mechanical magnetos, even for those of us staying with mechanical magnetos, which I do. They've been addressing a lot of that. So I want to start with magnetos and ask, does anyone know when, let's say even within 10 years, when the magneto was invented? Someone want to raise their hand?
Ooh, am I allowed?
I gave you a decade. Yes, sir.
1880s.
Oh, you're really, really close. You might be the winner, but is there
18
anyone who wants to take a second?
1890.
Well, I'll tell you what, you're going to win because you're first, and you're going to win something because you're second, and you were right because it was in the 1890s, because you guys were close enough. But yes, there's some question about the debate. It was invented by Mr. Bendix, and in the 1890s. Why that was important, of course, is because the first use of it was very soon after, in 1903, in the Wright Flyer. So our next question in this series, since I'm going to take the floor since you gave me a chance at this.
Oh, please.
Who was the Wright brothers' mechanic? Who yelled that out? In the blue? Excellent. Charles Taylor. Great. Come up, Charles Taylor. And then the last part of this puzzle, which might be harder, maybe, is in Dayton, Ohio, late in the life of the Wright brothers. They happened, and they were living in, at that point, nice big houses there. Anyone know what famous aviation name was their neighbor at the time? Another big name you can see here at the show.
Curtis.
No, not Curtis. You got to yell a little louder.
Douglas.
Douglas, no. We'll give a couple more. Anyone else?
Nicole.
Hughes, Nicole. Two more. Oh man, come on.
Walter Beach.
Walter Beach, nope.
Ryan.
I want to give this away. I have something for you, I promise. George Hartzell.
Wow.
Yes, was their neighbor. Ended up making the propellers for them. Literally started making them while he was living next door to them. Go figure.
That's incredible. That's incredible. So you have prizes for the winners. They should come see you
They'll
after.
Come see me afterwards, and we're all cleaning up, and someone else is trying to kick us out.
All right. Yeah, that's fine. And unfortunately, I have a hard stop because my wife is arriving just now at the front gate.
Okay.
So I want to thank you all for being here. I hope you're not too disappointed that Brian couldn't make it. He was really disappointed himself and asked us to cover the No Shift show for him. So thank you guys for being here. We'll pass a
Okay.
good
And if
word
you guys
along
want to
the
come up, I got one more question for you. You guys all, I'll do it. Jason's got to run, and then
right.
I've got something else for you also. Let me ask people about their tires so they know this. This happens to be a new Michelin that they just came out with. Who knows what these green marks are? Someone know what all these green marks are on the tire? Valve stem, no. That's not what all these green marks are. The heaviest spot, nope. Okay, let's try again. This is on your tires. You have this. They're green or white. There is a whole series of them all the way around the perimeter of the tire, and these matter for you to know as a pilot. Whole series of them. Lug nuts, nope. Exposed heat, no. Okay, well, we're going to have one last learning moment today. These are vent holes. These are actual, they pierce through the tire in these holes on every one of these tires. This is how air dissipates out when it's trapped between the tube, the tire, or the plies of the tire. And so if you were to take a brand new tire after you go and fill it up and go and spray soapy water on these, you're going to see little bubbles coming out. Because over time, that's what happens. And so that's another thing for you to know about this. Yes, the red spot that's on here, that's a balance spot, goes with your stem. But the green or white, depending on if it's a tube tire, they'll be white. Those little dots going all the way around here, they're little holes. Anyway, that's it. Thank you all for staying, and I see you up here.